Hi, I'm Bright Light, and this is a message for Seattle Pride. I'm sorry that you don't get to celebrate as normal this year, but one thing I know about Seattle is that it has one of the most diverse, most active, and most inspiring LGBTQ plus scenes in America that I've experienced. I really love all of the nightlife promoters that you have there working really hard to be super inclusive and really interesting and challenging. I've had some of my favorite shows, my favorite DJ performances, and favorite live PA performances in Seattle. So I thank you for showing me how fantastic America can be. And I really hope that whichever way you're able to celebrate this year, whether it's with a few close friends, social distanced, or being part of, or simply enjoying online digital programming, that you remember to be very proud and inclusive and tolerant and progressive as you always have been. I really hope that next year I'll get to come back and celebrate with people in person. But for now, I guess just sending all my love and support, and thank you for being fantastic every time I've been there and super welcoming. Happy Pride, Seattle.
Hi, my name is Isabella Von Gool, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about queer representation in horror movies. I'm so glad that you decided to join me for this. I know that it's a little bit of a strange topic, but actually my entire career has been built about exposing more people to horror movies, and if you're a horror movie fan or if you're not a horror movie fan, I think you can get something out of this. So I'm so glad that you decided to join me. Thank you so much. Sit back, relax, and let me go into the history of queer representation in horror movies. From the earliest tropes of vaudeville into the early stages of film and later on into cartoons, the effeminate villain has always been a common trope. He is soft. He cares for his appearance, maybe a little too much. He is opposed to the strong, masculine hero. He's a fop, a sissy, and he is as sinister as he is silly. He exists in the violation of binary rules of the masculine and the feminine, of the heterosexual norms of society that we are supposed to all obey. But arguably, these characters are the most fun, the most alluring. They have the best costumes, the best songs. They're often the most interesting. This would be a non-issue if it weren't for the fact that it affects the way children see themselves. I know that when I was a child, I didn't identify with Ariel. I watched The Little Mermaid ad nauseum because I loved Ursula, an unmarried woman craving power who was based on a drag queen. For many queer people, these childhood villains are empowering. They grant a sort of ability, the ability to live as oneself in spite of societal rules, not because of them. For much of horror's history, when depicting people of different genders and sexuality, it used ambiguous language to signify someone on the queer spectrum. Largely informed by the Hays Code, which existed from 1930 to 1968, which prevented the depiction of gays in media, queer characters were used as long as their sexuality was part of their deviancy and their depravity, which often led them to be killers or to be killed themselves. Most infamously being that of Norman Bates, whose desire to be his mother introduced the general public to the idea of, quote, transvestism and, quote, the aberration of gender swapping. Theo, in 1963's The Haunting, is described as having an unnatural attraction to the same sex, which she, quote, senses in her new friend, Neil.
Here? I'm Theodora, just Theodora. What about this crazy house?
I'm right next door. We have a connecting bath.
This one used to be the embalming room, I bet.
It was terrible being here alone.
I set dinner on the dining room sideboard.
Where's
at 6.
Markway? I thought he'd have been here before anyone else.
You serve yourselves. I clear up in the morning.
Have you known Dr. Markway long?
I have breakfast ready at 9.
No, I've never met him.
I don't stay after 6, not after it begins to get dark.
My only contact with him has been our correspondence about the, quote, experiment, unquote.
I leave before the dark comes, so there won't be anyone around if you need help.
No one can hear you if you scream in the night. Isn't that so, Mrs. Dudley?
No one lives any nearer than town. No one will come any nearer than that. In the night. In the dark.
You frightened, Nell?
Oh, no more. Just when I thought I was all alone. But how did you know my nickname is Nell?
Well, that is the affectionate term for Eleanor, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, I suppose it is. What a nice way of putting it.
The affectionate term for Theodora is Theo.
Theo. We're going to be great friends, Theo.
Like sisters. Listen, there's no need to hang around our rooms. Let's go exploring.
Oh, I'd like to.
Well, why don't you put on one of your new things? Something that'll stand out. I think it's a good idea around here to always remain strictly visible.
Be ready in a jiffy. But how did you know I brought new clothes?
You wear your thoughts on your sleeve.
Anyway, that's better than my heart.
In Alfred Hitchcock's 1948 thriller Rope, the two killers, Brandon and Philip, are hinted at being in a relationship, blurring the lines between whether their desires to kill is from their nature or reminiscent of their sexuality.
Brandon, how did you feel
When?
during it?
I don't know, really. I don't remember feeling very much of anything. Until his body went limp. And I knew it was over.
And then?
Then I felt tremendously exhilarated. How did you feel?
So much of the fear of this time stems from the idea that the homosexual lives among us, not a monster like the werewolf or the creature from the Black Lagoon, but one who wears a human mask. Into the 1970s, you have the rise of the erotic lesbian vampire, in which a pure, virginal, nearly always white woman is lured into a lesbian relationship by the unnatural paranormal lure of vampires, but ultimately rescued by a man. The fear of a fully liberated sexual woman enjoying her body without the assistance of a man is noted, particularly as this was during the height of the women's movement. Coinciding with the 1970s vampire craze was the resurgence of Dracula and Dracula-adjacent villains. Bloodthirsty, swarthy, foreign, spreading an illness from one person to another in a sexual fit of unholiness. Coinciding with the age of gay nightclubs, cruising, and the surgence of AIDS, Dracula traps all under his spell, even men, but especially women who are naturally the weaker sex. Dracula, with his hypnotic ability and indiscriminate thirst for blood, is a threat, not only to male sexuality, as he can steal your girl, but also to the latent desires of homosexual men who might fall prey to the intimate and sexual act of exchanging bodily liquids with another man. And from the 70s into the 80s and the 90s, you start to see a lot more of vampires as metaphors for carrying AIDS. So you have movies like The Hunger, movies like Interview with a Vampire, where it's much more about this overt sexuality of the vampire going into the transmutation of blood, what blood can carry and how that can transform a person from the normal human that they were before into something other. And that was a huge fear at the time, which translated over into vampires, which honestly made vampires even more popular. Clive Barker, a queer man who has written many books and movies about the fear and anxiety many have around sexuality. The theme of letting oneself go to pleasure and having something take over yourself is a very common theme in his media, especially in movies like Hellraiser and Candyman. Sometimes what you'll hear is the concept of left-wing horror versus right-wing horror, and the left wing means the monster that lives inside of us, versus the right wing, which is more about the monster that lives outside of society. So right-wing horror would be more like early horror, which would be more like Dracula, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the werewolf, the mummy. Those are monsters who live outside of our society, who come in and invade our society. And then you have left-wing horror, which represents a lot of like Clive Barker's movies, but then also movies like Jordan Peele's Get Out and Us, which is much more about the inner monster, the monster that lives inside of us, the monster that craves pleasure at any kind of cost, the monster that wants to achieve the American dream at any other cost. We are capable of being monsters as well, And in contemporary movies, you see a lot more of what is left-wing horror. It doesn't really necessarily mean that it's the same thing as like left-wing or liberal values, but it's just more about this idea that there's two kinds of dichotomy of horror. The monster that lives without, which comes inside and invades horror, and then left-wing, which is the monster that lives inside of us, in which any of us can potentially be a monster. One of the best examples of left-wing horror is 1985's Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge, in which a not-so-subtly queer-coded boy fights his darker urges as Freddy seeks to enter his body through his dream.
Sweet dreams, pal.
Grady?
What?
It's starting to happen again.
Jesus. Hey, man. The fuck's wrong with you, dude?
Run! Run! What is it? Dad! Dad! Run! Open your door! Run, you all right? Ryan, it's your father! Open this door! No! 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 Run! Run! Open it up! Run! No. You son of a bitch! You killed him!
Many queer people have passed the mainstream methods of entering horror filmmaking altogether and gained acclaim by doing camp instead. Camp is defined as an aesthetic that eschews, quote, high art in for bad taste and ironic value. The granddaddy of all camp horror is John Waters, whose films like Multiple Maniacs and Serial Mom became a benchmark for the gross, the bizarre, and the hilarious. Using drag queens as a way of upping the commentary on the absurdity of the horror genre's depiction of women, queers, and sexuality, which continues to this day with performers like Peaches Christ, Sharon Needles, and the Boulet brothers.
Thrill me with your acumen.
It excites him. Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
Trophies are for pageant queens. I certainly did not keep any for myself.
No, you ate yours.
A young queen tried to read me once. I ate her liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Director David de Cocteau, whose film series The Brotherhood all stars young, shirtless, mostly white, young men in 6 films of loose plots where they are vampires, warlocks, and werewolves, in a thinly veiled way of objectifying men under duress, giving new meaning to the term Scream Queen. Camp has become a way for queer people to engage with the problematic elements of the movies they love on their own terms, being in on the joke instead of the victim of. So that's all that I have for you guys tonight. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I really hope that there was something in here that was interesting for you and that you really liked the material. I hope that you will go out and rent some of these movies if you haven't seen all of them already. I highly recommend checking out more horror movies. There's a lot that you can explore about the human psyche and the human condition through horror movies. And oftentimes, horror represents where we are in our society, what our collective societal fears are. And so it's really interesting to go and watch these films. If you want to follow me, I am on the internet, obviously. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I also have a blog. I have a podcast and a YouTube series. Yes, the girl is busy and booked. Yes. So I'm Knock Emiss on Twitter. I'm the Nocturnal Emissions Show on Instagram. I am Nocturnal Emissions on YouTube. Nocturnal Emissions on Anchor, where my podcast is, and I am IsabellaLPrice.com, so you can check out some of my writing when I get around to it, when I'm not playing Animal Crossing and crying. Anyway, quarantine's been rough, y'all. Thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye. Happy Pride.